Victor Kane, the ruthless crime lord, Isabella Marquez, the cunning strategist, and Darius Cole, the shadowy kingpin, three of the most powerful figures in the city, drawn together by a mysterious invitation, never imagined that one meeting would expose their deepest secrets, ignite deadly betrayals, and leave them questioning who truly controlled the game. The city was alive with rumors that spread like wildfire, whispered in the back rooms of exclusive clubs, and over encrypted messages that vanished moments after being read. Everyone knew the bosses were powerful, untouchable figures who controlled vast empires from the shadows, yet no one ever saw them together. That was about to change. An unusual invitation had arrived, one that was impossible to ignore. Unlike the typical summoning via phone or email, this came as a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with a wax emblem no one recognized. The symbol was intricate, a combination of a serpent coiled around a dagger etched carefully into the wax. The envelope carried no address, no explanation, only a time, midnight, and a chilling note that simply read, "Your presence is required. Everything will be revealed." The recipients were a select few, each powerful in their own right. One ran an empire of businesses that spanned continents. Another commanded an underground network that controlled smuggling routes along the coast. There was even a political figure rumored to hold influence over law enforcement agencies. For them, this invitation was both a warning and a temptation. None had seen the others in years, yet all knew that if they ignored it, consequences would be severe. The secrecy was deliberate, designed to draw them in and unsettle them, a tactic they were all too familiar with. As the day turned into evening, the city itself seemed to hold its breath. People went about their routines, oblivious to the gathering that would soon shake the foundations of power. Meanwhile, the invited bosses prepared carefully, each using their own methods of travel and concealment. Luxury cars with tinted windows moved silently through deserted streets. Private helicopters hovered under the radar, and unmarked vehicles followed less obvious paths, all converging toward an unknown destination. The feeling of anticipation was almost tangible, a mix of fear, excitement, and a gnawing suspicion that nothing would be as it seemed. The envelope had caused its own stir. Recipients spent hours examining it, noting the texture of the paper, the smell of the wax, even the faint pressure marks from the seal. Every detail seemed intentional, as if the sender wanted them to feel exposed before they even arrived. The lack of a location was particularly unnerving. Each boss was forced to rely on intuition, contacts, and subtle clues embedded in the note. It wasn't just a meeting. It was a test. Who would arrive, who would hesitate, and who might disappear before the first hour had passed. As night fell, shadows lengthened across the streets, and the first of the bosses began their journey. The city's lights reflected off slick pavements, casting fragmented images of passing vehicles. In the hearts of those traveling, uncertainty and calculation intertwined. They knew this gathering would not be ordinary. It was a convergence of forces that had long remained separate, a collision that could change their lives forever. Every moment, every glance over the shoulder, carried the weight of unseen threats. By the time the hour approached, each attendee felt it, an unshakable awareness that the night would reveal secrets far darker and deeper than any of them could have imagined, and that what awaited them was not just a meeting, but a reckoning. The warehouse stood at the edge of the city, hidden behind a maze of cracked roads and overgrown industrial plots. From the outside, it appeared abandoned, a relic of a bygone era when factories had hummed with life. Rust crawled across metal doors, and graffiti from forgotten years marked the walls like silent witnesses to history. The location was perfect for secrecy. There were no neighbors close enough to see or hear anything, and no surveillance cameras monitored the perimeter. It was as if the city itself had forgotten this place, leaving it to time and shadows. The bosses arrived one by one, each moving with caution, alert to the smallest sign of danger. Their vehicles approached silently, headlights dimmed to avoid drawing attention. They parked strategically, leaving space between cars to prevent any suspicion of coordination. Even in this desolation, the feeling of being watched clung to them, a prickling awareness that someone or something was already waiting. Each arrival was calculated, every step planned to avoid detection. None of them spoke, yet the tension between them was palpable, a silent acknowledgement that their gathering was both extraordinary and dangerous. Inside, the warehouse was even more forbidding. The air smelled of damp concrete and rusted metal, carrying a faint hint of oil from decades past. Broken windows allowed streaks of moonlight to illuminate dust particles dancing in the air. Shadows clung to corners, and every creak of the floorboards sounded louder than it should, as if magnified by the weight of secrecy. The bosses took their places carefully, circling the center of the warehouse, eyes scanning both the room and each other. It was a neutral ground, yet none could truly feel safe. The walls seemed to close in, as though the building itself was aware of the power gathered within it. Security was present, but unusually understated. A few figures, dressed in black, moved silently along the edges, their faces hidden behind masks and scarves. They carried no visible weapons, but their presence alone was intimidating. Cameras were strategically placed in corners, but the angle of their lenses suggested careful planning rather than brute surveillance. Every detail of the warehouse had been arranged to control perception, to make anyone entering feel observed and small. It was an environment designed to unsettle, to amplify tension and keep the bosses alert, unsure if they were being watched by one another or by an unknown orchestrator. The air grew heavier as the meeting began, though no words had yet been exchanged. Eyes darted across the space, noticing subtle clues: a half-hidden envelope, a stack of papers slightly askew, a shadow moving just out of focus. Each boss felt it, a creeping sense that the real purpose of this location extended far beyond a simple gathering. Every corner of the warehouse seemed to hold secrets, and every shadow seemed to move with intent. The building, abandoned yet meticulously prepared, had become a character in its own right, shaping the mood and manipulating the participants without their awareness. The deeper into the warehouse they ventured, the more it revealed its secrets. Hidden alcoves, doors to small storage rooms, and forgotten machinery lined the walls. Each step was accompanied by a soft echo that reminded the bosses of the isolation surrounding them. There were no exits marked, no signs to guide them, just the faint glow of strategically placed lights that highlighted the center of the room. As the night stretched on, the bosses realized that what they had believed to be a simple meeting place was in fact a carefully chosen stage, a site designed to test, intimidate, and manipulate. In that moment, the warehouse became more than a location. It became the silent witness to secrets yet to be revealed, a trap waiting for the right moment to close. Tension thickened the air as the bosses settled into the dimly lit warehouse, each one acutely aware of the other's presence. Though the meeting had just begun, an invisible current of suspicion pulsed between them. The first signs of betrayal were subtle, almost imperceptible, a glance held too long, a hand brushing against a concealed object, a brief hesitation before responding to a silent question. Each boss knew the reputation of the others, understood their history of deception, yet none could predict who might act first. The sense of unease was immediate, a reminder that in their world, alliances were fragile, and trust was a dangerous luxury. The first betrayal came quietly. One boss noticed an envelope partially concealed under a table, edges peeking out as if placed deliberately. It bore no seal, no name, only a few hastily scrawled words that hinted at secrets long buried. Eyes flicked across the room as he lifted it subtly, careful to avoid drawing attention. The others noticed the movement, and in that instant, suspicion rippled like a hidden current. No one spoke, but each felt the silent accusation, a question of loyalty and intention hanging between them. It was a small act, almost unremarkable, yet it set off a chain of thoughts that would soon spiral out of control. As The minutes passed, the bosses shifted uneasily, aware that even a casual glance could betray their next move. The envelope had revealed fragments of information records of past deals, names, transactions, and hints at betrayals that none had expected to surface. One boss realized that someone in the room might have been leaking information for years, manipulating events from the shadows. The weight of this realization pressed on them, making every breath feel heavier, every glance more dangerous. What had started as a gathering to consolidate power was beginning to fracture under the pressure of hidden truths. The tension escalated when subtle signals, small, almost imperceptible gestures indicated that alliances were shifting. One boss leaned slightly toward another, not in conversation, but in silent agreement, a shared understanding that survival meant forming temporary partnerships. Meanwhile, eyes darted to those previously trusted, now scrutinized for motives that might not exist. The very air seemed charged, as if the warehouse itself responded to the growing unease. The bosses moved cautiously, aware that any misstep could be exploited, any hesitation could be fatal. Amid this silent war, a faint sound echoed from the far end of the warehouse, like a soft footstep or the shuffle of papers. Heads turned, muscles tensed, yet no one could locate the source. The uncertainty deepened the sense of betrayal. Each boss knew that someone had orchestrated this moment with precision, planting evidence to provoke distrust, to test their reactions. The subtle manipulations worked flawlessly. Every glance, every gesture, every hesitation became a weapon, and the bosses, normally masters of control, found themselves manipulated by invisible hands. By the time the night had deepened, the first overt signs of confrontation loomed on the horizon. Suspicion had fully taken root. The envelope, once overlooked, had revealed enough to ensure that no one could leave the warehouse without questioning the loyalty of those around them. Hidden alliances had formed, rivalries intensified, and the meeting, intended as a show of power, had already begun to implode. Each boss understood that the first betrayal was only the beginning, a spark in a room filled with flammable secrets, ready to ignite a chain reaction that could destroy them all. The air remained heavy, thick with tension, as the bosses faced a chilling reality. In this room, trust was a myth, and every shadow could hide a dagger. The first betrayal had not just shifted the power dynamics, it had exposed a deeper truth. They were no longer meeting to consolidate authority. They were trapped in a carefully orchestrated game where only the most cunning would survive, and even then, survival came at an unimaginable cost. Just as the tension in the warehouse reached a breaking point, a figure emerged from the shadows, moving with a quiet confidence that made every head turn instinctively. No one recognized him. His clothes were unremarkable, blending seamlessly with the dim surroundings. Yet there was a precision in his movements that suggested careful planning. He carried a briefcase, worn at the edges, but clearly important, and his presence seemed to absorb the light around him, drawing the attention of every boss without a single word. The sudden appearance shocked them, breaking the fragile balance that had been holding the room together. The stranger's actions were deliberate. He placed the briefcase on the central table, the metal clasps clicking sharply in the silence, echoing off the walls. From the case, he removed thick folders, each containing documents that detailed years of illicit deals, hidden bank accounts, and alliances that had been carefully obscured from the world. Names were listed alongside transactions, coded messages, and photographs that captured acts none of the bosses would have wanted exposed. The room went silent as eyes scanned the contents, each realization heavier than the last. Secrets thought buried were suddenly laid bare, threatening reputations, power, and lives. No one knew why the stranger had chosen this moment, or what his endgame might be. Every boss instinctively analyzed him, looking for signs of weakness or a hidden weapon, but he betrayed no emotion, no allegiance, no fear. His presence alone was a disruption, a force that none of the gathered power figures could control. Questions raced through their minds. Was he a spy, a rival, or someone seeking revenge? Each document he revealed felt like a trap, exposing vulnerabilities that had been carefully protected for years. The subtle realization that someone had been observing them all along sank in, and with it came a new layer of paranoia. The atmosphere became electric with unease. Every boss felt the weight of exposure pressing down, realizing that their carefully constructed empires could crumble if the stranger chose to act. Even the most confident among them recognized the precariousness of the situation. Alliances that had seemed stable moments ago now felt fragile, and the seeds of mistrust took deeper root. Eyes that had once scanned for opportunities now scanned for threats. The stranger in silence controlled the room, turning power into vulnerability with nothing more than a display of facts. What made the moment even more disorienting was the stranger's disappearance. Without warning, he stepped back into the shadows, leaving the briefcase open and the documents scattered, as though daring the bosses to act. The sudden absence left them disoriented, struggling to assess the next move. No one had been able to gauge his motive or predict his next action. The uncertainty became a weapon itself, heightening the paranoia and distrust among the group. Every glance between bosses carried suspicion. Every move seemed a potential threat. By the time the minutes passed, it was clear the stranger had shifted the entire dynamic of the meeting. What was intended to be a display of unity and power had become a scene of chaos and uncertainty. The files on the table were more than just evidence. They were leverage, a tool that could destroy careers, empires, and lives. In his brief presence, the stranger had upended the balance of control, leaving the bosses to face a chilling truth. The meeting they had believed was theirs to command had been infiltrated, manipulated, and weaponized. None could leave the room unchanged, and none could predict how far the consequences would reach. The meeting, meant to consolidate power, had turned into a battlefield of secrets and shadows. While the bosses were still reeling from the stranger's sudden appearance and the revelations he had left behind, an unnoticed detail began to emerge. A faint outline of a door, partially concealed behind a stack of rusted crates, slowly became visible as the dim light shifted. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, as though the warehouse itself had been designed to hide it. No one had noticed it before, and yet it seemed deliberate, as if waiting for the right moment to be discovered. A creeping sense of unease settled over the room, as the bosses realized that the warehouse held more secrets than they had anticipated. The hidden passage was narrow and lined with cold metallic walls that seemed to absorb sound. A faint hum suggested electrical activity, and the faint glow of small screens flickered in the darkness, revealing glimpses of what appeared to be surveillance equipment. The bosses approached cautiously, eyes scanning every corner, hands twitching toward concealed weapons. Every step into the passage heightened their awareness. It was one thing to be exposed by a stranger with documents, but it was another entirely to discover that someone had been watching them in real time, monitoring their movements, and perhaps anticipating every decision. As they peered deeper into the passage, it became clear that the surveillance system was extensive. Cameras pointed toward key locations around the city, capturing streets, vehicles, and even private residences. The realization struck like a physical blow. Their lives and operations were not only vulnerable inside the warehouse, but the entirety of their networks had been exposed. Each boss recognized the magnitude of what they were seeing. Months, maybe years, of careful planning, bribes, and secret operations had been compromised. The hidden passage revealed that they were not the ones controlling the game. They were being observed, manipulated, and recorded. The sense of panic grew with every second. Eyes darted to one another, searching for reactions that might indicate betrayal or collusion. Alliances that had formed in subtle gestures moments ago now felt fragile, as each boss questioned whether the other had known about the passage and the surveillance. Paranoia escalated, feeding the underlying fear that the stranger's documents were only the beginning. They understood now that someone had orchestrated this entire meeting with meticulous precision. Every step, every glance, every hesitation had been anticipated. The warehouse was no longer a meeting space, it was a trap. In the shadows of the hidden passage, a faint whirring of machinery reminded them that this was not just an improvised setup. Someone had invested time, resources, and intelligence into creating a perfect observation post, capable of monitoring the bosses in isolation and across the city. The power dynamics of the room shifted instantly. The previous threat, the stranger and his files, suddenly seemed almost minor compared to the scope of the surveillance. They realized that while they had been focused on controlling each other, an invisible hand had controlled the environment from the start. Fear now replaced ambition. Every step taken toward confrontation was tempered by the knowledge that their actions were visible to an unknown observer. The bosses understood, perhaps for the first time, that the meeting was not merely about consolidating power. It was a lesson in vulnerability. Every secret they had thought hidden, every betrayal they had feared or executed, was now a tool in someone else's hands. The warehouse, once merely a neutral ground, had revealed itself to be a silent adversary, reshaping the balance of power with nothing more than walls, shadows, and screens. Each boss left the hidden passage with the chilling realization that from this moment onward, no one could trust their eyes, their allies, or even themselves. The realization that the warehouse was rigged with surveillance shifted the atmosphere from tension to outright paranoia. One of the bosses, long known for his ruthless cunning, saw an opportunity in the chaos. Where others hesitated, calculating potential outcomes, he began to devise a plan that could eliminate rivals, consolidate power, and turn the night's uncertainty into advantage. Every subtle glance, every unease, became a piece of the puzzle he could manipulate. The others remained unaware that a strategy was forming behind calm, measured eyes. He began with subtle signals, unnoticed by some, obvious to others who were tuned to the silent language of ambition. Small gestures, barely perceptible movements of the hand or a tilt of the head, communicated instructions to hidden associates stationed throughout the warehouse. These allies, positioned carefully in shadows and behind crates, prepared weapons and tools with quiet efficiency. Every detail had been preplanned, every scenario considered. What had started as a meeting of equals was about to become a deadly game, orchestrated by one who refused to accept anything less than total control. The energy in the room became suffocating. The bosses, already unnerved by the stranger's revelations and the hidden surveillance, were now unknowingly being maneuvered like pieces on a chessboard. The knowledge that someone could strike at any moment hung over them, feeding suspicion and fear. Even a casual movement could trigger a chain reaction, and each participant became hyper-aware of his surroundings. Weapons were within reach, eyes darted toward every shadow, and whispers of unseen threats filled the air without a single sound. The warehouse, which had seemed merely mysterious and ominous, now felt like a battleground ready to erupt. As the night deepened, the ruthless boss began his moves with precision. Documents were subtly shifted, creating distractions. Small conflicts were ignited between rival bosses, each misunderstanding the other's intentions. The tension, already high, escalated into near hysteria. Every boss, struggling to maintain composure, began to second-guess allies and adversaries alike. What had been a meeting designed to consolidate power now teetered on the edge of violence. The room itself seemed to pulse with anticipation, every creaking floorboard and flickering light amplifying the sense that disaster was imminent. Time became distorted, each moment stretching longer than it should. The boss watched, calculating, analyzing, and waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. The hidden weapons, the secret signals, and the chaos he had orchestrated were all parts of a single plan. By exploiting fear and mistrust, he had turned the group against itself, ensuring that even if someone tried to intervene, they would be too distracted to act effectively. The precision of the manipulation was terrifying, highlighting just how easily power could shift when one individual refused to hesitate. The bosses, unaware of the extent of the scheme, felt the night slipping beyond their control. Suspicion, fear, and paranoia now dominated every interaction. The room, once a gathering of equals, had become a pressure cooker where even the smallest misstep could result in ruin. In the midst of this chaos, the ruthless boss remained calm, his mind focused solely on survival and dominance. The meeting, originally a showcase of collective power, had transformed into a deadly contest of strategy, manipulation, and premeditated violence. In this moment, it became clear that only one would emerge unscathed, and the first move had already been made. As midnight approached, the tension in the warehouse had reached a fever pitch. The bosses, once confident and composed, were now on edge, every movement scrutinized, every glance weighed for hidden meaning. Yet even in the midst of this chaos, none of them suspected the true orchestrator. It wasn't one of their own, nor the mysterious stranger who had appeared and vanished hours earlier. The manipulator had been among them all along, an insider, someone long presumed loyal, someone whose presence had gone unnoticed because trust had been assumed. The revelation, when it came, was as chilling as it was precise. The insider revealed themselves with a subtle flourish. No grand announcement, no dramatic gesture, just a quiet emergence from the shadows, a calm presence that immediately drew attention. The room seemed to contract as realization spread among the bosses. Everything, the envelope, the hidden passage, the surveillance, even the stranger's appearance had been carefully orchestrated. Each act had been designed to provoke suspicion, ignite fear, and dismantle trust. The insider's goal had never been power in the traditional sense. It had been exposure. They wanted the bosses to destroy each other, to reveal their darkest secrets, and to unravel the empires they had built in the shadows. Surveillance footage was projected onto a wall, images flickering with evidence of meticulous planning. It showed months of observation, detailing alliances, betrayals, and covert deals that none of the bosses had realized were being recorded. Every subtle maneuver, every whispered negotiation, every hidden transaction had been captured, stored, and cataloged. The bosses' reactions were immediate, a mix of shock, fear, and rage as they recognized that their carefully constructed facades had been stripped away. Trust, the most valuable currency among them, had been weaponized against them. Panic replaced strategy. Alliances crumbled as suspicion reached its peak. Each boss now viewed the others as potential threats, even those who had been closest allies moments ago. The insider had succeeded beyond expectation. By remaining hidden until the precise moment, they had turned the room into a trap where uncertainty reigned supreme. Every movement, every decision was now informed by fear, and the once pristine plans of the ruthless boss from earlier were suddenly vulnerable to disruption. No one could be certain of anyone else's loyalty, and every choice carried the weight of potential destruction. As the night wore on, the bosses struggled to comprehend the full scope of the manipulation. The insider had controlled events without ever needing to draw a weapon, relying instead on knowledge, timing, and psychological precision. The documents left by the stranger, the hidden passage, the surveillance equipment, all were tools in a calculated design to dismantle confidence and incite chaos. The realization that they had been mere pieces in a larger game filled the room with a tangible dread. By the time dawn approached, the warehouse had become a theater of psychological warfare. The bosses were fractured, exhausted, and paranoid, unsure of who could be trusted or what move to make next. The insider had disappeared as silently as they had revealed themselves, leaving behind only evidence of manipulation and ruin. The meeting, intended to consolidate power and affirm dominance, had been transformed into a masterclass in deception. The true orchestrator had remained unseen until the precise moment, leaving the bosses exposed, vulnerable, and powerless. And in that moment, it became terrifyingly clear. No empire, no matter how vast, could withstand the cunning of someone who wielded knowledge as a weapon. By the time authorities finally arrived at the warehouse at dawn, the aftermath of the night's chaos was both staggering and surreal. The interior was a scene of disarray. Overturned chairs, scattered papers, and faint traces of hurried movement painted a picture of panic and confrontation. Yet there was no immediate clarity as to who had been harmed, who had fled, or who remained behind. Some bosses had vanished without a trace, slipping into the shadows as silently as they had entered, while others were detained, their hands empty, but their eyes betraying the weight of secrets now laid bare. The true orchestrator, the insider, who had meticulously manipulated events, was nowhere to be found, leaving only questions and suspicion in their wake. The documents recovered from the warehouse revealed staggering levels of corruption and deception. Bank accounts spanning multiple continents, illicit trades, hidden alliances, and black market deals were all meticulously catalogued. The evidence was enough to implicate not only the bosses who had attended the meeting, but also a network of accomplices, politicians, and law enforcement officials who had been complicit in covering up crimes. The scale of the operations was unprecedented, exposing a web of influence that extended far beyond the city itself. Journalists and investigators pored over the files for weeks, uncovering layers of criminal enterprise that had remained hidden for years. Despite the arrests and exposure, a sense of unease lingered over the city. People spoke in hushed tones about the meeting that had shattered empires and left a trail of paranoia in its wake. Rumors circulated that some bosses had escaped, taking with them secrets so dangerous that their potential for revenge was almost unimaginable. The insider, whose meticulous planning had orchestrated the collapse, remained at large, a ghost in the shadows whose motives and next moves were impossible to predict. The city had been shaken to its core, not just by the crimes themselves, but by the realization that power could be undermined from within with precision, patience, and cunning. The surviving bosses, though spared from immediate danger, were forever changed. Trust had been irrevocably eroded, alliances were shattered, and every subsequent move they made was tainted by suspicion. What had begun as a meeting to consolidate power had become a lesson in vulnerability, teaching even the most ruthless figures that no empire, no matter how secure, was immune to manipulation. The psychological scars were as profound as any legal consequence, leaving participants haunted by the knowledge that their secrets had been weaponized and that someone had observed their every move. In the weeks that followed, investigators and journalists attempted to piece together the full story, but some questions remained unanswered. Who had truly controlled the game from the shadows? How had the insider managed to manipulate events so flawlessly? And perhaps most chilling of all, what had happened to those who disappeared into the night? The legend of the meeting grew, whispered among criminals and commentators alike, a story of ambition, betrayal, and unseen forces that could dismantle even the most powerful players. The hidden secret behind the meeting of the bosses became more than a cautionary tale. It became a chilling reminder that control is often an illusion, and that in the world of power and deception, the line between predator and prey is razor thin. By the time the city resumed its normal rhythm, the warehouse had been sealed off, its walls holding secrets that no one would ever fully uncover. The bosses who remained had learned a harsh truth. Power is fleeting, trust is fragile, and the consequences of underestimating a clever adversary can be absolute. The story of the meeting endured, not as a record of victories or defeats, but as a haunting chronicle of a night when the illusion of control shattered, leaving only shadows, suspicion, and unanswered questions in its wake.